Hola, ¿qué tal, amigas y amigos de este programa que es de ustedes y para ustedes? Estamos siempre y constantemente buscando lo mejor de los talentos, lo mejor de los liderazgos, lo mejor de los temas para presentarlos ante ustedes y ojalá tengan un servicio útil para ustedes. Esta semana tenemos el tema de temas, la felicidad. Y para la felicidad y hablarnos del tema está nada menos que, pues yo diría que el mayor experto manejando este tema, que ha escrito muchos libros, que es el señor Tal David Shaban. Y tan importante es que da cátedra en Harvard, ha escrito libros, y todo él ha tenido cambios profundos en su propia vida y ha influenciado fuertemente la vida de miles, quizá de cientos de miles, quizá de millones alrededor del mundo con un tema tan importante. So, Tal, I am so glad that you're here with us. I am thankful to you for participating in this program and with this audience, which would be a national audience in Mexico through TV Azteca, and it would be a very important Hispanic audience in the United States. And having you and having the issue of happiness, I'm sure we're going to have a beautiful half an hour. And let me start then, after introducing you, tell us a little bit about your activities, but where do they come from? And I'd like to make a comment here. When I speak about leadership and, of course, happy lives, there is one thing that is key and crucial. One is that we learn throughout life, we learn from others access to happiness and to leadership. But others have, like I call, the fall of St. Paul. When he fell from the horse, he reacted, he made profound reflections, and he decided that he was not happy with the life he was carrying on, collecting taxes. So he decides to move into a new life, and that brought him the happiness he was looking for. The other example I use is San Ignacio de Loyola, my hero, the founder of the Jesuit movement, of the Jesuit universities, in a profound way of thinking about ourselves and thinking about happiness. And he felt in war, he felt with violence into the hospital, he had a broken leg, and that gave him the opportunity to think about himself. And he didn't like what he was doing, and all of a sudden he reacted. So there are many instances where something happens to us, and all of a sudden we discover why we're not happy. I understand that you went through this experience, but tell me a little bit before your life. What was it about? Where were you born? Why did you come to Harvard? Why did you join Harvard? And then why did you react in this eternal search for happiness?
Yeah, so first of all, Mr. President, thank you for having me on the show. And, I so wait for the time when I can visit your beautiful country again, when all this is over, hopefully soon. So I became interested in happiness because of my own unhappiness. And I was an undergraduate at Harvard studying computer science. And I found myself in my second year doing very well academically, doing very well in athletics. I played squash, doing quite well socially, and yet being very unhappy. And it didn't make sense to me because everything society tells us is, you know, check these boxes. And I checked these boxes, and that certainly didn't help my well-being. And one day I went to my academic advisor and told her that I'm switching majors, and I moved from computer science to philosophy and psychology. And that's when my quest essentially started. That was my metaphorical fall from the horse. And this is what I've been doing over the past 30 years, you know, sharing what the science of happiness can teach us. And, you know, it's interesting that you gave the two examples of people going through difficulties, through a crisis of sort, and then having time to reflect. And in a way, society as a whole, collectively, we are going through a crisis. You know, whether it's obviously the pandemic, health, economic crisis, political crisis, environmental crisis. And more people are asking, am I doing the right thing? Am I living the kind of life that I want to live, that I ought to live? So there is a real opportunity in this hardship. I just hope that many people take this opportunity and grow from it.
Right, that's exactly right. But you also, besides having crisis or having a very special event that brings you to react, also you can be nourished in the science of happiness, and either at home or with your friends in school or with your community. And one teaching of Loyola is the shortcut to happiness is doing for others. So
Good.
if you start doing for others, you begin to discover your own happiness, and you can look after it with more passion and more intensity. So that's one way to go. The other one would be the way you teach in your courses, the way you do your conferences, which, by the way, I understand in Harvard, your class participating became the largest of all participants in any Harvard lectures or conferences or classes, teaching classes. So that's a place where you can come if you're not too happy what you're doing there. And you're gonna tell me about two things. One is that one, and the other one is you're bringing something that is new to me. Choices. You have to understand that you can have always choices. In everything you do in your life, you have choices. So you must be very clear that choices is up to you, and that choices will make the difference. Please extend on these two issues.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad you brought up these two issues because they're so central to a happy life. Let me actually begin with the second one, with the issue of choice. In life, we so often have what I've come to call rhetorical choices. Rhetorical choices are like rhetorical question. So a rhetorical question is, if I ask my son, do you want daddy to be angry? You know, it's a rhetorical question. Of course I don't. And in the same way, we have rhetorical choices. For example, if I tell someone, do you want to take all the good things in your life for granted? Or do you want to learn to appreciate the good things in your life? Well, that's a rhetorical choice. Of course, I want to appreciate the good things in life. And yet, with this choice, as with so many others, we do not choose the obvious path. Most people, most of the time, take the good things in their life for granted, do not appreciate it. So the role of psychology, of the science of happiness, is to help us institute reminders that will help us choose wisely. And if you think about it, this is exactly what religion is about. You know, when it comes to bringing about change, philosophers unfortunately had it wrong. Theologians had it right. Take, for example, Socrates, you know, father of Western philosophy, you know, perhaps one of the smartest people to have ever lived. he said that to know the good is to do the good. In other words, if we know what's good for us, we'll do it. Well, Socrates, as smart as he was, in this case, he was wrong. Because we know that we should appreciate all the things in our lives, and yet knowing is not enough. We know that we need to be kind and generous and benevolent all the time, and yet most of us, at least some of the time, are not. Knowing is not enough. Religion understood that. Religion understood what I've come to see as the 3 R's of change. We first need reminders. Second, we need repetition. Third, we create rituals. Reminders, repetition, and rituals. So for example, religion reminds us every day in our daily prayer to be grateful, whether it's for the bread that we have, whether it's for the miraculous world that's all around us. It's a reminder. Repetition, we do it day in and day out. Every week, whether, church, synagogue, mosque, we are reminded repeatedly of the kind of life we ought to lead, the moral life. And through that, neural pathways in our brains are created. And again, today we have the science to show that, so that these certain behaviors become second nature. They become who we are. So having these role models in the form of, saints, for example, that's an important reminder of how, and then having saint days year after year after year. That's a reminder, repetition, and that's how we create rituals. And this is what we need to do in schools. This is what we need to do in our political institutions. This is what, of course, we need to do in the workplace and in our families. Create reminders, repetition, and then healthy moral rituals. So that's when it comes to.
No, go ahead.
This is what, when it comes to change, one of the most important rituals that we can institute in our lives is giving. There's a lot of research showing that the most powerful way of increasing our own happiness is helping others become happier. And it's by giving, whether it's materially or spiritually. Anne Frank, back in the 1940s, wrote, "You can always give something, even if it is only kindness."
But I smiled.
And smiles are contagious. When we smile, then the people who are looking at us, neurons in their brains are firing.
Yes. Okay. Now, this religious concept, so that we learn the reminders and the repetition and the memorizing. When I read about spiritual lives like Mahatma Gandhi, like Martin Luther King, like Dalai Lama, like all of them that speak to us about spirituality also as a place for happiness. That's where we also generate and discover our own happiness. So religions could bring us the methodology of how we constantly and perpetually are in search for happiness. But these other guys give us some thoughts and some examples why we taste happiness, and then we repeat, and then we get in love with happiness, and then we say, what a happy moment, and I want more of those moments. Comment about that.
Yeah, so there is a very strong connection between spirituality and happiness. I'd go as far as to say that if we don't lead a spiritual life, happiness will elude us. In other words, it's one of the prerequisites for a happy life. The question, though, is why and what kind of spirituality? So, for example, we know that religion is a place that provides people spirituality. Albert Camus, the French existentialist, once said, "At every moment in my life, I have to make a decision. Do I have a cup of coffee or do I kill myself?" Why? Because when there is no God, when there is no spirituality, you essentially have to invent a reason for being at every moment in your life. Now, the question, though, is are there other places where we can find spirituality in our life? And the answer is yes. So if I give, if I help others, if I find meaning in my life, in whatever it is that I'm doing, that's a form of spirituality. Another form of spirituality is being present. You know, if I go outside and stand next to a tree and really am there with the tree, there is no way but to appreciate the miracle of creation. Or if you don't believe in God, of evolution, it doesn't matter. You know, Einstein, arguably, one of the greatest scientists in history said, there are two ways to live our life. One way to live our life is as if nothing is a miracle. The other way is as if everything is a miracle. And again, if we're really present to existence, then we realize that everything is a miracle. So having this sense of spirituality at work, in our relationships, just by the fact that we're alive is critical for a happy life. And we can cultivate it. Once again, it's a choice. But to cultivate that, we need to be reminded that we have that choice. When we next go outside, or next when we look at our friend or family member, we have to be reminded.
Tal, how quickly we got to the 10 minutes. So we go for a break. It's only 1 minute, and Pepe will put us back in track. So we go to a break.
Okay.
Tal, we're back. Thanks again. You mentioned Aristoteles. Aristoteles would say, ask yourself, what do you know? And also, what you don't know. And if you don't know, go to the source where you can learn what you don't know. So going to your seminar, being there, is finding out things that we don't know. Tell us about the content of your either conferences or your teachings in the school, or what you do with those students and how you bring light or enlightenment to them about happiness.
Yeah. So, the first lesson that I teach in all my classes, and whether I'm teaching university students, whether I'm working with managers in organizations, or whether I'm working with kids, young kids, the first thing that I talk about is that the first pillar of happiness is embracing unhappiness. You see, part of life, part of every life is difficulties, hardships, painful emotions. And if we reject these painful emotions, if, for example, I say I experience anxiety and I say I shouldn't experience anxiety, or I shouldn't be angry or sad, then what happens is that these emotions only grow, they intensify. So the first step is allowing in, really embracing painful emotions, unhappiness. It is when we embrace painful emotions that we open ourselves up to the pleasurable ones. Israeli Prime Minister back in the 1970s, Golda Meir, once said, those who cannot weep with their whole heart cannot laugh either. So learning to weep, learning to embrace, accept our emotions is critical, a first important step on the path to a happier life. Then, in addition, I focus on 5 elements of happiness. The first one is, as we discussed before, spiritual well-being, which is about finding a sense of meaning and purpose in what we're doing, which is about being present to the miracle that's all around. So that's spiritual well-being. The second element of happiness is physical well-being. Regular physical exercise is critical for happiness. Nutrition, of course, matters. Getting enough rest, recovery, sleep matters for a happy life. Then there is also intellectual well-being. So there is spiritual, physical, intellectual well-being. You know, interestingly, research came out recently showing that people who constantly ask questions, who are curious, who are learning all the time, actually live longer. So it doesn't just make us happier, it actually makes us healthier. So that's intellectual well-being. Then there is relational well-being, of course, interpersonal relationships, which is about giving, contributing, helping. It's about listening. It's about spending time with people we care about and who care about us. You know, Mr. President, the reason why I love visiting Mexico so much is because of the warmth of the people, the openness, the love that you feel. Even love, you know, love towards strangers. I always feel at home there. And this is the number one predictor of happiness: social support, intimacy, relationships. And finally, emotional well-being. And that, of course, is about embracing painful emotions and also cultivating pleasurable emotions like joy, like excitement, like love. So it's these 5 elements: spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional well-being that are the foundation of a happy life, all residing on top of accepting all emotions, painful and pleasurable.
Excellent. Question here, Tal. The example you give about Mexico and how we Mexicans treat ourselves, our families, and visitors. I would have an ingredient there: consciousness. We have to be conscious, we Mexicans, of how valuable the things are. Because if we do them just by routine, we don't feel the happiness of bringing happiness to others, to the visitor. So consciousness, give a little.
Oh, yeah, I have a lot to say about this because it's so important. It's not just doing it, it's knowing that you're doing it. And I'll give you an example from another area and then go back to relationships. So my mentor, my teacher and students, so Ellen Langer and Elia Crum from Harvard and now Stanford, did very interesting research.
Not Trump.
No, he's not my advisor or student. No. The research was on employees in hotel whose job was to clean the rooms. So there are the cleaners in a hotel. And she went to them and divided them into 2 groups. One group continued business as usual, and they did what they did every day, exercising. The second group, she told them that what they were doing was actually exercise. That, you know, when they were cleaning, vacuuming the floor, it's a form of exercise. When they were, cleaning the sheets, that was exercise. As a result of just telling them that they were doing exercise, in other words, making them conscious of what they were already doing, their physical health as well as their psychological health improved. Now, this is a very important study because they continue doing the exact same thing. Nothing from the outside changed, but from the inside, a lot changed. So let me take this idea and apply it to relationships. You know, it's great that when I come to Mexico and my family comes to Mexico, you know, we're treated so well and with so much warmth. And what I always emphasize when I go to Mexico: appreciate your value, appreciate what you're doing for other people, for the world, by being who you are. Don't take it for granted. And you know, the word appreciate is a very powerful word. It has 2 meanings in English and in Spanish. The first meaning is to appreciate, is to say thank you. The second meaning of appreciate is to grow in value. And the 2 meanings are connected because when you appreciate the good appreciates. So when you appreciate what you're doing, when you're cleaning hotel rooms, the good appreciates. When you're appreciating, when you are treating others with respect, with love, when you appreciate that, the good appreciates. You have more of it. And that is why it's so important at times to have someone from the outside just remind you of how amazing, generous, virtuous you are.
Yes, that is exactly right. And in a way, it's giving. When we Mexicans attend our visitors, when we are so warm, we're giving. We're giving, and the shortcut to happiness is giving. So we should be conscious of that, so that we appreciate that we're valuable, that we're doing good things. We distinguish very clearly those leaders that have been great but do wrong things, bad things, the Hitlers, the Napoleons, and all of those. And on the other side, you have the other leaders that transcend, and always you find compassion, a component of that leadership. I would say also that happiness has to be linked, totally linked with compassion, with love, which is one of the greatest things that we have, is we can share, we can give love, and we can receive love back.
Compassion is a central element of happiness. You know, the Dalai Lama, when he visited the West, he was really taken aback by a phenomenon. And the phenomenon was that many people in the West experience self-hatred. They dislike themselves. And he didn't understand it until he realized the following. What he realized was that in the West, when we talk about compassion, we're talking about compassion towards others. Whereas in Tibetan, the word tsewe, which means compassion towards the self and others. And the ability to connect the two together, realizing that there are two sides of the same coin. Because when I experience compassion toward other people, when I give other people, when I'm kind to other people, by extension, I'm also helping myself. And when I'm helping myself, I'm more likely to be compassionate towards other people. In other words, there is a potential positive upward cycle where helping self and helping others are two sides of the same coin. And if you think about it, what is the golden rule all about? Is do not do unto others what you would not do unto yourself, or love thy neighbor as you love yourself. There's no distinction here between self and others. Love your neighbor, and also love, it doesn't say, love your neighbor and hate yourself. It says love your neighbor as you love yourself. And realizing that we're all in this together. We're all interconnected. This is the essence of true and sustainable compassion. It's also the essence of true and sustainable happiness.
Great. We go to a break for 1 minute and we'll be right back. Okay, Tal, we're back with our audience. Dalai Lama says the world belongs to everybody, 8 billion people. Nations state that people decide when you have a democracy. So people own the ball. And today we're not sharing so much. We're building walls. We're isolating. We're heavily criticizing the past. Globalization now is accused of all the evils and wrong things in the world. And so what's the world we're living in? And if that is reducing the opportunities for happiness, or if that is enhancing the possibilities, or better off, maybe we need more to go within ourselves to find out who we are, What are we doing? What is our purpose? Because when we define a purpose, then we know what we are after, what's our dream, and how we can get closer to happiness. What's your opinion on what's going on in the world today? And later on, I will get into the pandemia. But right now, the world that we had in this last 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah. So the unfortunate thing about the world today is the following: that on the one hand, there is great progress. We have more medicine than we've had before. Potentially, more people can be fed than ever before. And yet, levels of happiness are going down. Anxiety levels, depression levels are skyrocketing. And this is before the pandemic. The reason is because we're focusing on the wrong values. We're focusing on the wrong goals, the wrong objectives, the wrong milestones. Most people in the world believe that if they want to be happy, or if they want their children to be happy, the path to happiness goes through success, through the accumulation of material wealth, through the accumulation of accolades and praise and prestige. When in fact, happiness doesn't come from the external. Yes, of course, we need basic needs. Of course, we need food and shelter. That goes without saying. Without food, it's very difficult to be happy. But once basic needs are met, we need to change our view. We need to shift our view towards the non-quantifiable. In other words, towards cultivating relationships, towards cultivating goodness and generosity, compassion that we spoke about, towards collaboration. These are the real sources of happiness. Not having, an extra car or becoming wealthier. Again, once basic needs are met. And this is what I've come to call the happiness revolution. It's when people understand that the ultimate currency by which we take measure of our lives is not the quantifiable, but rather happiness. To do that, the revolution has to be, as you pointed out, internal, much more than external.
Yes, but this brings me to thinking, and thank you for praising Mexico and Mexican people, great. But usually in Latin America, we put our future, we put our destiny, we put almost our life in hands of government. We expect so much from government, from the president, from the Tlatoani. And we even put our happiness in hands of the Tlatoani. Incredible, but that's the truth. On the contrary, Saxons or United States, through Kennedy, we learned that don't ask you what the country is going to do for you. Ask yourself what you're going to do for your country. Here, the question would be, ask yourself, what are you going to do for yourself? How are you going to become happy? Or how can you be successful? Or whatever purpose that you have. But in Latin America, I see that as talón de Achilles. I don't know how you say that, but our weakness is we expect everything from the president, even our own happiness. We put it in the hands of a president. And usually we have lousy governments, lousy presidents, well, maybe except me. But that's my claim here in Mexico. Don't expect so much from the president. Get to work. Look for your own good. Look for your own happiness. Come in.
Yes, so I think that's very important. One of the fundamental elements of happiness is taking responsibility for your life rather than outsourcing happiness. One of my teachers who passed away a few years ago was Nathaniel Branden. And Nathaniel Branden talked about self-esteem, which is very much connected to happiness. And one of the pillars, according to Nathaniel Branden, of self-esteem was taking responsibility. And the way he taught it was that he would say, you take responsibility for your life when you realize and truly internalize the fact that no one is coming. No president is coming to save you, or manager, or prince, or princess. No one is coming. and it's up to you and you alone to make the most of your life. And he said, when you realize that no one is coming, that's when you take responsibility for your life. And that is the foundation of self-esteem and happiness. So he was teaching this in one of his workshops. And a guy from all the way in the back of the room puts his hand up and says, Dr. Brandon, I understand what you mean about the importance of taking responsibility. I understand what you're saying when you say that no one is coming. But Dr. Brandon, I disagree. And Nathaniel Brandon asked him, how do you mean you disagree? And the young man says, well, Dr. Brandon, I disagree that no one is coming because Dr. Brandon, you came. So Nathaniel Brandon thinks for a few seconds and then he says, young man, you are right. I came, but I came to tell you that no one is coming. And this is a very important message to communicate, because once we take responsibility, it's a first and very important step towards making the most of our lives. Take responsibility and at the same time, maintain compassion for ourselves. So it's not to be hard on ourselves that we take responsibility. It's to make a difference. And even if we make a small difference in our life, we already feel better about it. And then we'll make a bigger difference, and so on and so on. These are the kind of role models that our children need as well. So in school, teach about taking responsibility. This is the role of government, to help educate towards self-reliance that goes along with, must go along with, compassion for others.
I take that as statement that you said that government has responsibilities in all of this that we're talking about. But usually today, governments are dividing. Governments are breaking the community and society into two sides. Same as happened in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans we're having here in Mexico. This president is dividing us. And now we know that we're 50-50, and he gave us a nickname for each side. And it's incredible, this fight for power, this fight for mass that presidents look as their supporters, usually is dividing, it's bringing in the divide. And the question here is, I see people, the less educated and those that have less income, have difficulties to survive and very little time to think about themselves, what to do, that they should have aspirations, they should have self-esteem. But in a way, I think governments do not nourish those needs, do not bring that into people, and it's always claiming that they're doing this and doing that and obtaining this and obtaining that, presumptuous governments, and with the need to respond to what they promised when they were campaigning. And what is going on in the United States is going on in Mexico today. And I don't see that we're getting closer to happiness or to having a better life, because we're struggling first with all this complexity of politics and partisan colors and everybody claiming that they are right and the other one is wrong. And on top of all of that, here comes the pandemia. The pandemia comes to bring us such a heavy burden on our shoulders. Fear is a key issue that is today coming so strong in the souls and the mind and the heart of people, that there's a lot of lack of hope. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's happening. Can you give us light on that? Give us some, like it happened on the Enlightenment, reason, science, and humanity, or humanism, are three pillars to really come along. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this troubled world we're in.
Yeah, so we are in a troubled world, and we see it also from the data that's coming out of Mexico and the United States, and Japan and China. And the data coming out is that anxiety levels are at an all-time high, that depression levels are going up significantly, and the question is, what do we do about it? And you see, what we're going through right now is a global trauma. It's a traumatic experience on a global scale. And the question is not whether it's easy or hard. Of course it's hard. No two ways about it. The big question is, how are we going to emerge from it? And in psychology, there are two terms that are relevant for individuals as well as for the collective. The first term that most people have heard about is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is when, following a trauma, and again, whether it's on the individual or the collective level, there is a collapse, a psychological collapse or a political collective collapse. So that's one possibility, post-traumatic stress disorder. The other possibility is post-traumatic growth. Now, we're as likely as an individual or as an organization, a company, or as a country, we're as likely to experience post-traumatic growth as we are to experience post-traumatic stress disorder if we know what conditions to put in place. And what we need to focus on, what governments need to focus on, what enlightened leaders must focus on right now is how do we create the foundation to bring about post-traumatic growth? Because we're going to get over this. You know, the world has gotten over crises before. But are we going to emerge stronger or weaker, better off or worse off for what we're going through? And right now, the political leaders around the world are not doing a good job of it. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring people together. You know, this is what crises can do for us. You know, back in 1890, the great North American psychologist and philosopher William James wrote about the benefits of war. Now, he said war is a terrible thing. Of course, you know, innocent people die, bloodshed, and yet out of war come positive things as well. And he said, how can we create conditions without having a war so that the good things emerge? Things like people gain a sense of meaning and purpose in life. People become more compassionate. Potentially, people come together as a result of war. How can we bring, now we are at war. You know, we're at war with the virus, we're at war, the psychological war. How can we emerge stronger from it? And there are concrete actions that we can take. We know that what increases the likelihood of post-traumatic growth are relationships. This is the time to emphasize relationships, interpersonal connections. We know that what helps emerge stronger from a trauma is giving. This is the time to emphasize giving. We also know other simpler things. Physical exercise actually makes us stronger, not just physically, also psychologically. So people need to exercise regularly. This is the time to look at spirituality, physical well-being, intellectual well-being, relational well-being, and emotional well-being, so that we as individuals, as families, as organizations, and as nations, so that we can emerge stronger from this collective trauma.
You know, we've been closed for 5 months now at Centro, which is a thinking place, it's a think tank, it's an academic place, it's a leadership place where we teach kids how to go within themselves, how to find out what they dream, what they have as purpose, and find out their leadership, and find out that they can be happy, that they can be happy in this life. So we stopped for 5 months and we are thinking about how do we come back. We know that we have to modify, that we have to reinvent great part of what we're doing. And a word that comes to us is Renaissance. Is this guys in Florence, this Medici family, all this, that Renaissance was incredible. New ideas. A lot of people got to think what we should do. And the refugee, the place to do that is what you described, is even culture, music, good things, happiness, spiritual life. And they came out with great changes in humankind. I really hope that our way out of this pandemia, which is a war, we're in a war against pandemia. And that lesson that you mentioned about how do you get good things out of war, we're getting good things out of pandemia. Many, just having this conversation, you and I, this Zoom that came to let us work from home and let us stay away from the pandemia, but be productive and be thoughtful and be thinking and discussing and getting together with the rest. So Renaissance could be a way to go, but we have to define Renaissance. We have to define, okay, what is it? We're doing an exercise here in Mexico about what is next after not only the pandemia, what is next about this president that we have today, or how can we force him to behave in a different manner, not to divide, not to do things just by his own thinking, but with recovering the checks and balances of the political different powers in government, the legislative and that. And one thing we brought to our thinking is, what about following Moses when he called the people and he said, I'm gonna take you, or we're gonna go to the promised land. And the promised land is the attraction, is the place that calls everybody, okay, let's go. We go through the desert. We might be hungry. We might not have water. We have to open the sea and cross back. And the promised land was a desert. Give us your final thought, because we're running out of time again. Just your final thought about what would be your best advice for this next months, weeks, or years to come.
So, Mr. President, I'm so glad you brought up Moses as a role model. You know, Moses was a servant of the people. You know, God chose him when he saw him, you know, chase after a lamb, serving the flock. Moses also stuttered. You know, he had a speech impediment. And there is a real message here, because what God said essentially is, we don't need a rhetorical, you know, greatness. What we need is not someone who gives the speeches. We need someone who listens. And this is the time to listen. It's a time to listen to our children. It's a time to listen to our partners. It's time to listen to the people, because the wisdom is out there. And what we need to do as leaders, whether it's as parents at home, we're leaders, whether it's teachers in the classroom, whether it's political leaders, this is the time to listen. For when we listen, we validate the other. When we listen, we validate the other side as well. And it's when we listen that we create the kind of cohesiveness that we need to see, that we need to have in order to emerge stronger from this collective trauma. So we need leadership that listens right now, is the essence of creating the post-traumatic growth as opposed to the post-traumatic stress disorder.
Tal, thank you very much for sharing with us your wisdom, your experiences, your own personal experience, that you were able to move from one way of being into a next level and change your life. I'm sure with this program, many people, at least we would expect, thinks about what has been said here, reflects about these ideas and moves ahead and really goes for it. That would be my best wish right now. I think humankind is going to go far away, we're gonna go far and high, and we're gonna make it. We need to have hope, we need to have purpose, and after purpose, we need to have performance. Because usually we leaders, or we thinkers, we stay on the ethereal world of ideas and planning, but we don't deliver, we don't get things done. And that's what we as individuals, we need to do. I listen to this program, what's my response to it? What is going to be my action in my own life, in the life of all of those people surrounding me? Thanks again, Tal. I hope to see you if you visit Mexico. We have a wonderful place here in Guanajuato, in the community of San Cristobal, where we love to share thoughts, we love to share love, we love to have compassion, and we love to teach kids how to make it, how do they grow, how do they become those citizens that are happy in first instance, and number two, that give and help the other. Thank you very much again, Tal. Gracias, gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Mr. President.